Welcome to Built Through Time. Today we're tackling a truly monumental structure, a feat of human ingenuity and sheer perseverance that completely reshaped global trade and really connected the world in a new way, the Panama Canal. Now, you probably know it as this vital shipping lane, the shortcut between the oceans. But its story, it's much more than just concrete and steel. It's packed with, well, colossal ambition, terrible tragedy, some serious political intrigue, and frankly, engineering breakthroughs that were almost unbelievable at the time. We're going to explore how this iconic structure came to be, the immense challenges faced, and maybe some enduring lessons it still offers us today. Let's rewind the clock a bit, way back actually to the 16th century. Right after the Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama, realizing it was just this incredibly thin strip of land separating two enormous oceans. Immediately, the idea of a shortcut sparked, avoiding that long, dangerous trip around Cape Horn. In fact, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, this is back in 1534, he ordered a survey. But the conclusion then, impossible. They just couldn't see how building a ship canal could be done.
No, absolutely. The geographical appeal was obvious right from the start. But what's really fascinating, I think, is how that early impossible label eventually set the stage for one of history's most ambitious projects, and initially one of its most catastrophic attempts, too. That dream just kind of simmered for centuries.
Right, which brings us forward quite dramatically to the 1880s, and a big name.
Yeah.
Ferdinand de Lesseps, the man behind the Suez Canal in Egypt, a massive success. So he comes to Panama, leading a French company, ready to do it all again.
What could possibly go wrong, right?
Yeah.
He'd already done it once.
Well, quite a lot, as it turned out. The challenges in Panama were just immense and profoundly underestimated. Suez was largely digging through flat, sandy desert, relatively straightforward geologically speaking. Panama, totally different beast. It was rugged, mountainous, volcanic spine down the middle, and just relentless tropical conditions, heat, humidity, torrential rain. The French attempt basically walked right into this, plagued by, poor planning, some really severe engineering misjudgments, and these invisible killers, tropical diseases. The human cost is just hard to fathom. I read that over 20,000 workers died during that French effort between 1881 and 1889. 20,000. That's a city. What specific engineering mistakes led to such a horrific tragedy?
It really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? What happens when these huge engineering projects aren't really controlled by people with deep engineering know-how? De Lesseps, you see, despite his Suez success, he wasn't a professional engineer. He was more of a diplomat, a promoter, a visionary maybe, a non-linear thinker, you could say. He was focused on the end goal, build the canal, rather than the hard rules of engineering and physics needed to get there. And in Panama, that just didn't work. For example, his obsession with the sea-level canal, just like Suez, no locks.
Right, he wanted to replicate Suez, exactly.
Exactly. But he, or the decision-makers, didn't properly account for the huge tidal swings on the Pacific side. We're talking 10, sometimes 20 feet difference. Compare that to the Atlantic side, less than 4 feet. It would have been an operational nightmare. Ships trying to navigate those massive shifting water levels. Engineers pointed this out, but de Lesseps' vision just overruled them.
So he was forcing a solution from one context onto a completely different, much harsher one.
Pretty much, yeah. And then there was the excavation. Especially at Culebra Hill, the Continental Divide. They pushed ahead without really understanding the soil. These torrential rains would saturate everything, leading to massive landslides, huge slides, constantly refilling the areas they'd just dug out. They planned for steep one-to-one side slopes like you might in drier, more stable ground. But the geology there needed much gentler slopes, maybe 1 to 4, which meant they needed to excavate 3, maybe 4 times more material than they budgeted for just to stop the sides collapsing in. And it was like shoveling sand against the tide. And then there's the Chagres River, this massive river cut right across their planned route. It's known for extreme flooding in the rainy season, just becomes this raging torrent. The French started digging without any real solid plan for how to control it, which, would make operating a sea-level canal completely impossible anyway.
So basic hydrology was ignored too. Were there no other ideas on the table? Better plans, maybe?
Oh, there were, absolutely. At the big Paris Congress in 1879, which was supposed to decide the route, it was, let's say heavily influenced by French commercial interests who held the rights, the wise concession, for Panama. So even though most engineers there didn't back the sea-level plan, and hardly any had actually been to Panama, the sea-level route got pushed through. There was a much more practical plan proposed by an engineer named Adolphe Godin de l'Epernay, a lock-and-lake system.
Up-like system.
Yes, remarkably similar to what the Americans eventually built, but back then, dismissed. ignored.
So what happened to de Lesseps and the company? All this money, all these lives.
The company went bankrupt. 1889. They'd spent over $260 million, a staggering sum back then, and excavated maybe 70 million cubic yards. But the project was only about maybe 40% done, a total disaster. It caused a huge scandal back in France. Charges of fraud, mismanagement. De Lesseps, his son, even Gustave Eiffel, who they brought in late to design locks for the failing project. The sentences were eventually overturned, but the lesson was brutal. Ignoring fundamental engineering for politics or finance, it leads to catastrophe.
Okay, so the French dream collapses in disaster. But the idea of the canal, that didn't die, did it? The United States steps in next. But they weren't initially set on Panama, were they? I thought they were looking seriously at Nicaragua. What changed their minds?
This is where the story gets really, really interesting and kind of weird. So the U.S. absolutely needed a canal for trade, for the Navy, moving ships between oceans quickly. And Nicaragua looked good on paper, especially with that big lake Nicaragua.
Something easier, maybe.
Potentially. But then comes Felipe Jean Bonavarilla. Remember him, the French engineer from the earlier project.
Right, the lobbyist.
Exactly. He had a vested interest in the U.S. buying the French assets in Panama, so he starts lobbying U.S. lawmakers. Hard. And his masterstroke, convincing them Nicaragua was too dangerous because of volcanoes.
Volcanoes, seriously.
Seriously, get this. He sent every U.S. senator a Nicaraguan postage stamp that just happened to feature a smoking volcano, Mount Momotombo.
No way. A postage stamp decided it.
Well, it certainly helped. He painted this picture of constant volcanic threat in Nicaragua, making Panama seem like the safer, more stable bet. It sounds crazy, but it worked. It swayed key votes.
Wow. Sometimes history turns on the smallest things.
Okay, so politics swings towards Panama. What happened next to secure the deal?
Congress authorized buying the French assets in 1902 for $40 million. Big step. But then Colombia, which Panama was part of at the time, refused to ratify the treaty the U.S. wanted. They felt the terms weren't favorable enough.
A roadblock.
A big one. But it led to the next dramatic twist. The Panamanians themselves, they really wanted the canal built for the economic benefits, and they also resented Colombian rule. So with, let's say, encouragement from Bonavarilla and a sort of nod from Teddy Roosevelt's administration,
A little nudge.
a perhaps significant nudge, they revolted. Declared independence from Colombia in November 1903, the U.S. Navy just happened to be nearby, preventing Colombia from easily suppressing the revolt. And just days later, the new Panamanian government, represented by Bonavarilla himself, signs the Hay-Bonavarilla Treaty. It gave the U.S. control over a 10-mile-wide canal zone, basically in perpetuity. Hugely controversial, seen by many as blatant U.S. imperialism, but it cleared the path.
Okay, so the U.S. is in. They spent $375 million total, including $10 million to Panama, $40 million to the French stuff. Huge money. But as we saw with the French, money wasn't the only cost. What about the human toll onto the Americans?
Still significant, tragically. While nowhere near the French numbers, the American effort from 1904 to 1913 still saw about 5,600 workers die. Mostly from disease, still, and accidents. Accidents were brutal too. Dynamite, railroad accidents, falls.
But fewer from disease. What changed?
This was the absolute game changer, medical understanding. The French thought yellow fever and malaria came from bad air, miasma. By the early 1900s, Dr. William C. Gorgas and others knew the real culprits, specific types of mosquitoes.
A mosquito connection. That was huge.
Monumental. Gorgas implemented this massive systematic sanitation campaign. Drain swamps, clear brush, fumigate buildings, install screens on windows, provide clean water. They basically waged war on the mosquitoes, and it worked. Death rates from disease plummeted. This was arguably the single most critical factor in the American success, learning directly from the French failure on disease control.
Okay, so health improved drastically. What about the engineering? How did the Americans avoid the French pitfalls there? They didn't try the sea level thing again, did they?
No, definitely not. This is where strong engineering leadership really shone. John Frank Stevens, the first chief engineer for the U.S., was a seasoned railroad guy. He took one look at the Chagres River during flood season and basically said, forget the sea level plan, it's madness.
So he saw the reality on the ground.
Immediately. He forcefully argued for a lock system, convincing Roosevelt and Congress to change the plan. And the plan they adopted. Essentially, it was that lock and lake design proposed by Gaudin de Lepinay back in 1879, the one the French ignored.
Wow, so the ignored plan gets resurrected. A bit of engineering justice there.
You could say that it was a total vindication.
So what were the key parts of this American lock and lake approach?
Okay, so the core idea. Instead of digging down to sea level, you use locks to lift ships up 85 feet, sail them across an artificial lake, and then use locks to lower them back down on the other side. This created Gatun Lake. By damming the Chagres River, finally controlling it, they created what was then the largest man-made lake in the world.
And that lake became part of the canal.
Exactly. It provided nearly half the canal's transit distance without needing massive excavation. Plus, it held the fresh water needed to operate the locks. Brilliant, really. Of course, they still had the massive challenge of the Culebra Cut, digging through the mountains of the Continental Divide. Major David Gaillard led that effort. Relentless work, excavating over 76 million cubic yards, dealing with constant landslides, just like the French.
But they succeeded where the French failed.
They did. They had better technology, huge steam shovels, an efficient railroad system to haul away the spoil, but also, crucially, a better understanding of the geology and a willingness to adapt and just keep at it. It was a war of attrition against the mountain. And building those dams, Gatun and later Madden Dam, was essential to manage the Chagres River and guarantee water for the locks.
And it all came together. The canal officially opened August 15th, 1914. Just incredible timing, right, as World War I was erupting. It really feels like the American success came down to adapting, learning, using science, and, well, respecting the engineering reality. So fast forward, the canal opens in 1914. How has it shaped things since then? What's its role today, over a century on?
Oh, its impact was immediate and massive. It instantly redrew shipping maps. Think about it. New York to San Francisco by sea, it shaved off almost 8,000 miles, weeks of travel time gone. During World War II, it was absolutely critical for the U.S. military, moving the Navy between the Atlantic and Pacific quickly. And today, still a vital global artery. About 5% of all world maritime trade goes through it. And get this, something like 40% of all U.S. container ship traffic relies on the Panama Canal.
40%, that's huge.
It really is. Between 13,000 and 14,000 ships pass through every year. It takes about 8 to 10 hours for a ship to transit the whole system.
And I bet it costs a pretty penny for those big ships.
It certainly does. Tolls depend on the ship's size, weight, type of cargo. The biggest ones, these massive container ships, they can pay around $450,000 for a single crossing.
Wow.
Yeah, it generates about $1.8 billion in revenue annually for Panama. Though my favorite toll story is still Richard Halliburton, the adventurer. 1928, he swam the canal.
Swam it.
The whole thing. And they charged him toll based on his weight. 36 cents, the lowest toll ever paid.
That's fantastic. Okay, so huge economic engine. But the U.S. didn't control it forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Control transferred to Panama in 1999. How did that transition go?
Well, the lead-up wasn't exactly smooth. Tensions over U.S. control had been simmering in Panama for decades. Many Panamanians saw the Canal Zone, that U.S.-controlled strip, as, a colonial presence. Things really boiled over with major riots in 1964. That pushed things towards negotiation. Finally, in 1977, President Jimmy Carter and Panama's leader, General Omar Torrijos, signed treaties agreeing to the full handover by December 31st, 1999. The treaties also guarantee the canal's neutrality, with the U.S. retaining the right to defend it if necessary. It was actually quite controversial in the U.S. at the time.
Right, giving away the canal.
Yeah, there was strong opposition in the Senate, but the treaties were narrowly ratified. Panama took full control on schedule, and by all accounts, they've managed it very successfully ever since.
Have there been any recent rumblings about control or influence? I feel like I heard something.
There has been some talk, yeah. Particularly in the last year or so, 2024, 2025. Some voices in U.S. politics suggesting maybe the U.S. should retake control or exert more influence, usually citing concerns about coal rates or sometimes perceived influence from other countries, often China, using the canal.
I see.
But Panama's government has been very clear, very firm. The canal belongs to Panama, it's run by Panama, and that's how it's going to stay. They're asserting their sovereignty, quite rightly. It just shows the canal is still a really important geopolitical piece.
Absolutely. And what about the canal itself, physically? Ships
Yeah.
keep getting bigger and bigger. Has the canal kept pace?
That's been a major focus. The original locks, amazing as they were built for ships of the early 20th century. By the early 2000s, many modern ships, the so-called post-Panamax vessels, were simply too big to fit.
Right. The original dimensions were becoming a bottleneck.
Exactly. So Panama undertook another massive project, the canal expansion. It started in 2007, a $5.25 billion investment.
$5 billion. What did that involve? Just bigger locks?
Primarily, yes. They built a whole new lane of traffic with much larger locks alongside the original ones. The new locks are way bigger, 180 feet wide versus the original 110, and 1,400 feet long versus 1,050. This allows about 79% of the world's cargo fleet to pass through, up from maybe 45% before the expansion. A huge increase in capability.
That's impressive. Did they have to worry about water usage with these bigger locks?
They did, very much so, especially with climate change impacting rainfall patterns in Panama. So the new locks have this really clever design. Each chamber has these 3 large lateral water-saving basins beside it. They capture and reuse about 60% of the water from each lockage.
Oh, recycling the water.
Smart.
Very smart. It significantly reduces the amount of fresh water drawn from Gatun Lake for each ship. They also switched to rolling gates, like giant sliding doors, instead of the old swinging miter gates. The whole expanded canal opened for business on June 26, 2016. It basically doubled the canal's capacity.
The scale of these projects, the original construction, the expansion, it's just mind-boggling. The ambition across centuries. It really is. And if you look at the whole story, especially that contrast between the French failure and the American success, there are some really profound, enduring lessons there for anyone involved in any kind of large-scale project, really.
What stands out most to you? What's the biggest takeaway from this whole epic saga?
For me, it boils down to this. Major engineering endeavors have to be led by competent professional engineers. It sounds obvious, maybe, but the Panama story proves it. You need people with the deep training in the physics, the geology, the hydrology, the fundamental rules, but also the practical experience to apply them, to adapt when things go wrong, because they always do on projects this big.
Right. Not just the big idea, but the know-how to execute it safely and effectively.
Precisely. De Lesseps, that nonlinear thinker, he was so fixated on his goal, sea-level canal like Suez, on time, on budget, that he effectively ignored the engineering realities, the warnings from experts, and the result, catastrophe, human, financial, everything. The Americans, on the other hand, took a more, let's call it, linear, rule-driven approach. Stevens, Goethals, Gorgas, they insisted on thorough investigation, understanding the soil, the water, the disease vectors. Their success wasn't just about having more money or better tech, though that helped. It was fundamentally about respecting the engineering principles, learning from the French mistakes, and making decisions based on science and evidence, not just ambition or politics.
It's a really powerful reminder, isn't it? Vision is essential. Ambition drives progress. But it has to be grounded in expertise, in rigorous science, in respect in the fundamental principles. This story just starkly highlights the terrible cost, human and financial, when those principles get ignored, and conversely, the incredible things humanity can achieve when they're properly applied. It's truly a testament to what can be built through time. If you like and want to hear more of these discussions, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Built Through Time.